founders that understand what other people want to hear is the first thing. Some people are good at picking up on like what matters to the people that they're talking to, whether it's customers, whether it's investors. Some people are just going to only pitch the thing they want to pitch. You kind of have to give people what they want. There's a thing that people are funding right now. But in reality, fundraising is 100% a nepotism game, especially in the early stages, and not a meritocracy. If you have not spent time just meeting other startup founders, your life is going to be 10 times harder.
Colin, how are you doing today?
I'm good, really good.
Got a cool episode today with Jack Kuveke. And before we get to that, I want to give a shout out to Sydecar. They have been sponsoring for the last couple months our podcast. So big thanks to them. And for those who may not be aware, Wannabe Angels out there, you can actually begin your venture capital career with Sydecar, the go-to platform for those new to managing SPVs and funds. I actually use their syndicate product for every investment I make. Colin uses Sydecar to manage his fund. And to learn more, you can visit Sydecar's Wannabe Angels page at sydecar.io/Wannabe Angels. Of course, we'll leave a link in the show notes. I think they had a big milestone recently, didn't they?
Yeah, I think they hit 1.1 billion in AUM with like 1,800 SPVs done. So a few.
I see the email here. They've got 975 deal sponsors, GPs. So that's us, right? Me and you, we're a GP.
Yeah.
Okay. 20,000 LPs, 1,800 vehicles, 1.1 billion assets under admin. How many have you done with Sydecar?
I mean, now with the fund, I think I've got to be at like 15 or 16.
Oh, wow. You've got me
So,
beat.
I mean, between the two of us, we're maybe getting close to, 1% of all those that they've done.
I've led 6 deals on Sydecar, it looks like. So that means I've syndicated, and I'm at, 6 times 27.5, a little more, a couple $100,000, not bad. So getting up there, and I think I've invested in a couple. Well, I guess I've invested in all my own deals too, since they are a syndicate. But yeah, I think we're a decent, maybe not decent percent, but I don't know, 0.5%, 1%, something like that. How's our math?
Of the SPVs done, we're over 1%. I don't know
Really?
the total dollars though.
Okay, that must be more you than me. So thanks for the
I'm pulling my
thank-
weight here, Harry.
Thanks for pulling your weight. And we also did a really cool webinar recently with Sydecar that we published last week. So if folks haven't listened to that, it was a cool webinar all about syndicate products. So go back and listen to that last episode if you're just tuning in for the first time. And without further ado, let's hear from Jack. Jack Kuveke is a serial entrepreneur and startup founder who currently runs Jabroni Capital, a startup satire newsletter and consulting practice that helps startups raise money. He's had an eclectic career in tech, from building Minecraft servers with 1 million players to raising a $53 million ICO out of his dorm room. So I'm excited to talk with Jack today. How are you doing today?
Living the dream, brother. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. I'm excited to hear more about your story. We're going to talk a little bit about the media and the brand that you've built, and then, of course, your work with raising money for startups. So a little bit different episode than we normally do. But Colin, what was the first thing you thought of when you heard Jabroni Capital? What did you think of?
That's a good question. I was mostly got stuck on the ICOs and thinking about the good old days of doing that. But I've been enjoying reading Jabroni Capital on LinkedIn and the irreverent takes. So,
You know what I thought of? I thought of
what,
WWF, The Rock. He used to call everyone a jabroni back in the day, like when I was in 6th grade. That WWF was huge. Wasn't that his thing?
what,
Call everyone a jabroni? Or am I thinking of
We
someone
sure
else?
did.
He
what
did,
is a
right? That was The
jabroni?
Rock.
Do we know the definition of a jabroni?
Ask
Maybe
Jack.
There's
Jack, can you
there's a couple
enlighten us?
definitions. The one that I always go towards, because this is like the term that I always used growing up, which was like a Long Island broy, like someone who goes to an Islanders game is like an obnoxious finance bro from like New Jersey or Long Island or the tri-state area. But in The Rock's terms, which he's the one who popularized the term, he also recently trademarked the word jabroni, which is maybe the funniest thing of all time. But yeah,
Assist incoming to Jack
right.
in
I know.
6 months.
I have a little bit of time before he comes after me, but yeah, no. So his original term was like someone who loses on purpose and is like the heel of like is just like a loser in the ring, just like losing on purpose. He's a jabroni.
Got it. So according to the Oxford Language Dictionary, jabroni is a real word, a foolish or contemptible person. Get it together, you jabronis. So that is the official definition. I don't know, what's that other Urban Dictionary? We'll look that up later. But that is the perfect transition, Jack, because I want to talk a little bit about the brand that you've built. How do you describe your media business? Is it like your LinkedIn presence? You've got a newsletter? Like, what's the biggest and best, or what do you sort of, tell people?
Yeah, so I tell people I write satire on LinkedIn, and my priority is this newsletter. Newsletters are a little harder to grow, but the audience is way more valuable. You obviously own the mediums as outright, like they're way more engaged. So I'm really focused on using social media like LinkedIn to drive subscribers to the newsletter. And then I'm exploring like starting to explore like Instagram, Twitter, which I'm bad at. Ironically, I've never had a social media other than Twitter and LinkedIn because I couldn't make money off all the others and I just don't like it. But now as I'm building up this newsletter and brand, I have to like start learning social media. And I used to like run social accounts at like previous companies and stuff. So I have experience running, especially for like Twitter, writing newsletters, press releases, etc. But this is like my first foray in trying to build like a social media brand and then use that as leverage to drive it into a newsletter, which, as you guys know, like having a podcast, having a newsletter, owning your own audience directly is like far more valuable than social media, because social media just, you don't own it. I get banned on LinkedIn like every 2 months. So, I don't really consider those followers my own. I'm renting them temporarily until I'm inevitably banned permanently from the platform.
So you're just getting banned for just the newsletter, or just the irreverent takes that are maybe a little too off color?
Ironically, I'm mostly getting banned for like comments. Like I'll comment in jest back to people, and LinkedIn will flag it. Like their AI algorithm will flag it as like harassment, because I'll like tell people that they have to go like F themselves in order to raise money or whatever. And they'll be like, "Oh, you're harassing this person," even though it's like my buddy I'm responding to.
They don't.
And so
The
that'll
AI
get
doesn't
kicked off.
understand satire, I guess.
No, they don't.
What's the goal or the point of the brand that you're trying to build on, I guess, let's say LinkedIn?
Honestly, the point is just like A, grow newsletter, B, do something that I have fun doing for a long period of time. So like I think in this economy, not having an audience is completely to your disadvantage. So I knew I had to build an audience, but the way in which most people go about building audience makes me want to fling myself off the roof of a WeWork. So I just am like unwilling to do that. So for me, this was the first thing I found that like, oh, I have energy to consistently do this over time, and making other people laugh. And like, I wanted to be a comedy writer when I was young. So this is like a way for me to like express a creative outlet. I feel like a big problem in tech, and I'm sure you guys feel this, is you have like, you do something for a year and a half and then you burn out and you go, oh my God, I hate this so much. Like it's so intense. It's so much work. I now would want to get a new job. And that's why like the length of people's jobs are shortening and shortening. And it's partly like just cultural at the time. But for me, I was trying to pick something that like I could own my own audience, grow a brand, and get my personal name out there, which will only be advantageous for me. But I'll be like doing it consistently over time, because like writing like, here are 10 tips for like, I'm going to then not do that. And I'm going to want to like, again, get over that really quickly.
Yeah, makes sense. So how's it going? What kind of stats do you sort of track to see how you're doing on LinkedIn?
Yeah, so I think like follower counts ones, we've got like 16,000 followers over the last couple months, which is pretty good. I think the thing I cared more about is like engagement impressions. So engagement rate's really good. So like the number of likes and engagement and comments I get per typical content creators of a similar bracket, or it's like way higher. So satire gets a really high engagement rate. But impressions is probably the thing I use the closest as an analytic. Like how many millions of impressions am I getting every month? So right now I'm averaging like 1.5 to 2.5, depending. So
Million?
I think for million, yeah. So I get about 200 to 650,000 impressions a week. And so I'm tracking that as my primary metric. And so that's been growing up. As that grows, follower count, engagement rate, all of that continues to grow as well. So really just focusing on impressions per post is really what matters to me.
Yeah. And I'm looking at it looks like I don't know how often you post, maybe once a day or once every couple of days. Your most recent one, 22 hours ago. Most tech pros who claim to be an operator couldn't operate a toaster if their life depended on it. These people worked at a startup when it was a little rocket ship. I won't read the whole thing, but you kind of get the sense. And 177 people liked it, 49 comments. So yeah, I'm guessing quite good engagement on these types of posts that you're doing. Is there sort of a strategy? I think this kind of ties in well to, either founders who are trying to build their personal brand, or, VCs or startups, like kind of like you said, it's kind of a big disadvantage to not have a brand on social media or a newsletter or a podcast or something. So like, obviously whatever you're doing is working. I kind of like the LinkedIn aspect that I don't think a lot of people are doing that. And then you're using that to feed your newsletter. So what's sort of, a couple like takeaways or tactical tips that people can use from what you've learned?
Yeah, what I found really quickly was that I was surprised because I wrote a satire post haphazardly one day and it immediately went viral.
On LinkedIn.
And yeah, on LinkedIn. And it got like, 300,000 impressions and 1,500 likes and over the
Nice.
course of a day or two. And I was like, oh, wow, like this works. The main thing I figured out, which I didn't realize that it would have any impact on my business, I got a couple hundred DMs from people being like, that's so funny, yada, 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 which is cool and all. But the thing that I saw consistently over the next month of doing it was founders coming to me being like, oh, you must know how things work because your satire so well mocks the ecosystem. So like there's if you're in this community and you're like banging your head against the wall as like someone who actually an employee at a tech company or a startup founder or a VC, you notice a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of BS that no one talks about publicly. And especially on LinkedIn, everyone's just like self-congratulatory, putting out like the worst advice of all time. Everyone's like, woo! And it's really stupid and silly. And we all know that. But because it's a professional platform, no one's willing to call it out. And so people were like, because you call it out, because it's like making a really nuanced point and doing a good job of making fun of these people, you must know what you're talking about. So I'd love to talk to you about your business. And so that's probably the biggest learning I had, is because it was like people felt like it was on brand for the community and for the industry. They were willing and interested in working with me because they figured I must know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, very cool.
So how
Anything,
did you
Colin?
how'd you get to be an insider? How'd you get to know the ecosystem so well?
I think I'm a couple things. I've had a bunch of different jobs in tech, so I've literally in this when I was 18 or 19, I went from having no money to having I joined this cryptocurrency and 9 months later had $2 million. So it was like it was literally like I was a poor idiot 19-year-old to $2 million in the span of 9 months. And like I was asked to raise money for this cryptocurrency as a 19-year-old who knew nothing. And in 9 months was able to like build a community of tens of thousands of people and raise $53 million for this cryptocurrency. And I think that was the first thing that gave me this perspective of like, oh, like there's like this luck factor involved with everything that you do. There's also like everyone assumes this project is like, I thought it was hilarious. It was like everyone's like, well, Game Credits is a really legit project and like they're really great. Like I really love what they're doing. And it's Jack, the 19-year-old idiot who's done nothing with his life, writing everything and communicating it to people. And so I was like, oh, this is all like it can, if you're just good at communicating, you like look the part, act the part of someone who knows what they're talking about, people will assume you know what you're talking about. And the reality is pretty much no one knows what they're doing in life. They're just kind of figuring it out one step at a time. And so it gave me kind of this like behind the mirror, like, or behind the lens of what's going on in tech, where it was like people are just kind of like running around in the dark and everyone from the outside assumes they know what they're doing, but they're kind of just figuring it out. And so then that was the first experience where that opened my eyes. And then after that, it was, working at a tech company, raising money a couple different times from venture capitalists, whether it was I raised money for the startup huddle. I worked at the startup accelerator called Antler, and getting the lens of like, now I'm an investor and how being on an investment committee and being like, this is the most arbitrary decision-making process I've ever witnessed in my entire life. And the companies they said no to, almost all the companies that raised the most money in the next year or two were the ones they said no to. And the ones they said yes to, and hearing their decisions of why they said yes, were completely fucking wrong. And those companies did not make any money.
Yeah.
And so I think it was a mixture of those experiences and then going out as a startup founder, raising money, and just like meeting hundreds upon hundreds of founders over the next year or two. I just gave me like a lot of different perspectives and inputs and like, oh, this is just stupid and made up.
Yeah, I always find it funny how, let's say you meet some founder, or you like it, or maybe don't like it, or you pass it to some VC and they're like, oh, I hate this. I'm not going to invest. And you pass it to someone else, they're like, I love it. And it's like, sometimes it just seems so subjective. Like one person just likes it, another person doesn't, right? And I don't know that that's like skill, like the sign of a skilled investor. It's just interesting. It's like sometimes a bit of a numbers game. So, it's cool that you've got this sort of multifaceted fundraising experience, having done it yourself, sort of work more on the accelerator, that kind of more corporate side. And then also kind of like on the flashy, buzzy, like ICO, kind of crypto side, which sees sort of whole spectrum. And is that kind of your main job now, that, like helping startups with fundraising, or how does the newsletter tie into your
Yeah.
sort of fundraising day job, maybe?
Yeah, so about like a year and a half ago, I was running growth for this fintech company and I quit and I was like, I can't work for anyone ever again. I just like
Mhm.
I can't do it. And so like everyone who decides to do their own thing, you have two choices. You either go build like a try and build a recurring revenue software or business, or you go services. So for me, I was like, the easiest thing to do is do services and pick a niche that I'm good at. So fundraising is what I settled on because I had run fundraising workshops in the past while I was working on this ed tech company of mine. And I just did like a bunch of fundraising workshops pro bono for startup founders and help people raise tens of millions of dollars over the course of a couple months. So I knew I was pretty good at it. I knew it was something that people would pay for. And so when I quit that job a year and a half ago, I just kind of like told people, hey, I quit my job. I'm looking for pickup consulting gigs. And a couple people who went through those past workshops of mine were like, hey, we'll hire you to like
Mhm.
help us with fundraising. So I kind of fell back into it naturally. And for me, that is like the primary way that I pay my bills is I work on a coaching basis with like on average like 20 companies a quarter who are raising somewhere, typically their first institutional round of like $1 to $5 million is like my sweet spot of folks that I work with. It's not something I plan on doing forever, but it's something that I think the people that hire me, like they need help. They're looking for someone to like be with them in the process of doing it. I'm like not a miracle worker. I'm not someone that goes out and be like, I'm going to broker 20, to 50 introductions for you. I'll work with you on the process of like running a fundraising process, booking meetings, and coming up with good narratives. And I've had a lot of people tell me, hey, you're flipping this story around completely changed my fundraise and you're really good at it. So I like to think that that's my specialty, but the reality is, it's just I'm like one tool in the toolkit of founders that are trying to raise money. And I'm not like well, I'm gonna solve your fundraising problems forever and you'll magically raise money. I'm like, no, it's gonna suck, but like hopefully it sucks less when you hire me and you'll get the perspective of someone who's done this before and like a ton of other case studies of things that have worked for founders because I get a lot of views into how founders put together successful rounds by working with so many.
So what's the, I mean, for people that, successfully raise, you've looked across a bunch of companies, raised, helped raise 100 million. What's your pattern recognition there? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think there's two things. One, founders that are good, that understand what other people want to hear is the first thing. Some people are good at picking up on like what matters to the people that they're talking to, whether it's customers, whether it's investors. Some people are just going to only pitch the thing they want to pitch. You kind of have to give people what they want. Like there's a zeitgeist in the market. There's a thing that people are funding right now. There's a common pattern of the things that founders say to investors to get them to give money. There's a, the ballsy approach of like hanging up meetings or whatever it is to get people to care. So knowing what people want to hear is one thing. The second thing is founders with good networks. In reality, fundraising is 100% a nepotism game, especially in the early stages, and not a meritocracy. And so people who have invested time in meeting other founders and building a network almost always raise money. And I tell people this when they come to me, I'm like, if you have not spent time just meeting other startup founders, your life is going to be 10 times harder. The clients of mine that go raise money the easiest are always the ones who are like, yeah, I've been, meeting two or three people a week for the last year and a half. And not being annoying, being like a fun
Mhm.
person to hang out with, like, just like smoking a joint on the street, like that sort of thing is what ultimately gets people to like you and get them to be willing to make introductions, not harassing them 1 month before your fundraiser. Please make introductions. Like that
Yeah.
just doesn't work.
Yeah, I feel like this kind of lines up with something I've seen is, and obviously, especially as a startup founder, really anyone, you've got a million things to do. And so it's easy to sort of postpone. Oh, I got to go raise money. Let me start right now. I sort of call it like planting the seeds, right? You got to, if you want a tree, you got to plant the seeds, right? You can't just ask for a tree, right? And, so I feel like that's kind of, I mean, similar here, right? Like everyone, needs to plant these seeds. Hey, who do you have? A little visitor over there, Colin?
This is, and
Our
now I'm
is our
nervous.
newest
Yeah.
guest. She's a founder. She needs fundraising help to pay for kindergarten and preschool. So
Well, I
yes,
like this. Has she been to
my daughter.
Stanford? Is she in the Stanford pre-K program? Because
Oh well,
if
she's
so,
already
I mean,
finished. She did in 3 years, Stanford. It's
damn.
you know,
Well, this is a good reason now for people to watch the video on YouTube because they could see your cute, is that daughter?
yes. Yes, this is
Uh,
my daughter.
that's awesome.
Very nice, very nice. So, Jack, when it comes to fundraising, I mean, I guess, Colin, you had a good tweet actually this morning that I thought was kind of relevant to our conversation today. He basically tweeted out that, I think it was one of the companies he'd worked with, they reached out and they said to Colin, I saw you're connected with a number of people of LinkedIn. I kind of collated them here. I'm assuming it was in a spreadsheet. Was wondering if you could take a look, highlight anyone who might be able to run an intro to. And I feel like a lot of times people come to me and they say, "Hey, who do you know?" And I'm like, "What do you mean, who do I know? I know like a million people. I've been doing this for 10 years." Like it's such an open-ended question. Like, how
Yep.
can you help? What companies do you know, or which investors do you know? I'm like, dude, I just ignore those emails usually, right? But if
100%.
they come to me with like a tactical list, like, "Hey, here's 100 people that I'm targeting. Put your initials by who you know and how like how well you know them, and I'll decide who, of my investors and friends, So what are some like tactical, I keep using that word, but what are some sort of like specific things
Yeah,
that you kind of coach founders on, or approaches that they could take if you think that is the best option?
for sure. I think great point. I couldn't agree more. People are just like, who's in New York is cool. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what is, I don't know, my friend Jeff, but he makes sandwiches for a living. So like, what is that? Like, what are you talking about here? But yeah, no. So I think one thing that I like to do, and I picked this up from a founder of mine who's really, a founder friend of mine who's really great at fundraising, which is he'll send a fundraising update email. So when he starts the fundraise, he'll like you have a spreadsheet of people in your network like Harry or Colin who you think can help you, but you realize that like both of your interests lie elsewhere, right? Like
Hmm.
I always like to joke with my founders that I work with that like you're competing against people's interests in sex and sandwiches. So like
Hmm.
when you ask them for anything, like realize that that's way more attractive. Like
Hmm.
everyone cares way more about having sex and eating a sandwich than helping you about it on anything. So you have to like try and capture their attention really quickly and succinctly. So one thing that I've seen people do at scale is like once they have this list of people of like investors, founder friends that are willing to help them, they'll send them an investor update, but like, and what that a fundraising update. And so what it is at the top is it's like one or two sentences at the top that are like exciting things about the business. Like, hey, close two more customers, things are going really well. Here's who we're trying to talk to this week. And then they have a list of
Hmm.
like the target funds they want to talk to, a spreadsheet linked that has all of the funds they want to talk to with who's making interest to those people. And then below that, they'll have like a list of people that like past meetings of the last week, and they'll accredit the people who gave them the intros. Like, thanks, Chris, for the meeting to
Hmm.
like A16Z. And then they'll have like upcoming pitches below that, again, attributing member, like whoever referred them to those investors. And then at the very bottom, they'll have a blurb in their deck. So they'll have their forwardable blurb in their deck right at the bottom. And instead of BCCing everyone that email, they'll CC everyone on that email. So
Hmm.
everyone can see everyone else on the list. So if it's like a legitimate crowd of people, be like, oh shit, like I
Yeah.
saw that like, Sally from A16Z is forwarding their deal around. Like I should as well because I feel bad. And then they have everything in that email that they could possibly need to make introductions. The list of investors they're trying to talk to, the
Hmm.
blurb, the email, and the validation that other people are helping them. And so I've seen that be like a really like, because obviously going back and harassing 50 people individually to make intros is a goddamn pain. So I've seen that work really well as like a way to like psychologically try and push people in the network. And I've had
Yeah.
clients do that to me, and I'm like, oh shoot, like I totally didn't realize I had an intro to Alpaca. Like I'll make that intro right now. Like I just completely forgot because I'm like, yeah, you pay me, but like
Yeah.
I don't know, like unless you like hammer me over the head with I'm trying to talk to Alpaca this week, I don't know, I forget. I got a lot of
I
people I'm talking to.
I think the CC strategy is hot right now. I think
Oh, yeah.
I've seen a couple founders doing that, and I like your explanation. It sort of shows, I think everyone has kind of latched on to the like, hey, the thanks, the shout outs, right? You kind of get the little FOMO, like, oh, Colin got thanked by the founder. I got to do something this week, right? Everyone's kind of doing that now. How important do you think it is to like stand out, right? Like, I think a lot of founders do that sort of thank you now. Do you think it's important to kind of like try something new, like the CC strategy? I don't think everyone is doing that, right? I've only had a couple founders do CC. Most people are still doing, like the typical BCC or, like
Mhm.
direct, more like email newsletter kind of update.
I think standing out's really important. I think like the what you say being similar to what other people are saying, like in the similar type of like strategy in terms of story communication, the kind of buzzwords you use, like the indicators that the success indicators that VCs are normally used to seeing, that has kind of remained the same for a while. But it's getting their attention, which is important because I think there's all of the people that or most of the famous founders we know that have raised money, the Adam Newmans, that Bolt guy, like these are wacky people. Like they always have like one thing, like they wear shoes outside, or like they're like namaste in the beginning of a call. But then they go and say all the things that VCs want to hear. But it's my version of that is, and I don't know if you heard this on the podcast, but I would join calls and be like, we're Huddle and we're a metal band out of Des Moines, Iowa. And it would like we'd have a wall of guitars behind us. And when we did that, investors would be like, what? And it would immediately bring the energy down because it would be like really fun and casual. And like we would sometimes have a guitar in our hand because we were so nervous before talking like a billionaire that we'd like be playing a guitar to like have fun. But what it signaled is like they're fun and different, they're memorable. So what it really is like they're memorable. There's this great founder I remember a couple of years ago who would start all of our calls. She was doing a sex tech company and she'd start all the call. I don't know if you remember this or heard of this. Like she would start every call being like, how's your sex life right now with an investor? And investors are like, what? And it like, but so the people who don't like it are obviously not going to invest, but they probably weren't going to invest before. But everyone who's interested is never forgetting that girl ever again. And so I really think what it comes down to is being memorable and standing out, and then following the sort of prototypical things that VCs want to hear.
I've had that experience in my life. One, having red hair, you're always look a little bit different. You kind of look like Adam Newman, though, just to be clear. No,
you do have Adam Newman vibes, Jack. At least
you have shoes on, though, right? But one of the things I always lead with in conversations is semi-pars. I'm from Alaska, and people go like, "Oh, that's cool. I don't know anyone from Alaska, right?" And then I don't know. It's like you said, if you can, there's also like the concept of the accusation audit. Almost if you can get out of the way, like any problems or things that people perceive about you, or just like set them off guard, you can actually get down to business and like actually get them to hear you. I had like an econ professor in college that did this. He told a really bad dad joke, which I picked up in running companies. Like I used to start every meeting with like a bad dad joke, and it just like changed the whole tone of everything. And people like listened, and anyway, it's
I think Colin, you and I, we both just invested in Heddle. It's a retail analytics platform, and the founder, he leads every update with a song. And I clicked on the first one. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. It's just like something a little different, unique. And Colin, I like the idea for you. Well, you got another kid over there. Why don't you start every meeting with a kid? You bring your kid and be like, especially if you're a startup founder, and as long as it's like true and authentic to you, it's like a little gimmicky. But if you bring your kid in and you're like, hey, this is my kid, this is who I'm doing this for, something like that, right? Like as long as you're not like completely full of crap, I think that would be cool.
Renting a child from Guatemala.
But like, hey, if this is the reason why you're like working so hard, like I think that would like stand out to me as an investor. Because you're right, like these investors, I think it's really important to like put yourself in the other person's shoes. Like I do a lot of media and PR stuff with companies I work with, and I'm trying to tell them like a lot of reporters have two emails, like one for the people they know and one for pitches. They're getting hundreds of pitches a day. Like you have to stand out, you have to do one thing to stand out from 90% of the crowd. And I feel like it's similar with fundraising. What do you think, Jack?
Of course. I mean, I think it's just human nature that like we remember people who stand out, and everyone else just kind of slips away. I have talked to probably in the last 6 months 1,000 new people, and like I'm not like a 50 people a week or something. Like I don't know if that's actually the math on it, but like hundreds upon hundreds. And I can remember. I have a pretty good memory recall. I'm sure if I talked to them again, I'd be like, oh yeah, whatever. But like there's like 20 people who stand out. There's this like real big guy from Canada who got on the call, and he was like a sportscaster. He's like, listen up, brother. I like your stuff and I'm ready to raise some money, but I don't really need your help. I'm already in the midst of it. Just want to chat. And I'm like, dude, this guy is the man. Like,
Yeah.
and I was like, I'll never forget that guy. But like everyone else, I'm like, yeah, for most people, they're just like so monotone and like deadpan.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Well, speaking of your clients, what do you help your clients the most with if you had to kind of narrow it down?
yeah, so there's two camps. The first is positioning and storytelling. So I think what I part of what we're getting at right here with this whole like standing out is narrative, right? The reality is human beings are monkeys. We've been telling stories around campfires for literally 10, 20,000 years now. And that's how we predominantly remember information. If it's related in a story, we have a chance of remembering it. That's why great teachers are great storytellers. So people who just state facts boringly on slides, people go like, I don't, whatever. It doesn't resonate. So for me, when a founder comes to me and they do not have a good narrative that weaves the information about their business into the pitch, I'm like, you need to stop that immediately. We got to incorporate storytelling. So the first thing I always work on is narrative. So like if someone's like, you could, for instance, if you were a financial controller, like say you're building a software for financial controllers, right? Most people would be like, this is the problem financial controllers have. This is the solution. This is the market. That's how most people pitch. I come in and go, this is how we start. I was a financial controller at a Fortune 100 company a couple of years ago, and I noticed this problem, but I wanted to see if other people had this problem too. So I interviewed 50 other financial controllers of Fortune 100 companies. They had this issue. And when I dug into the data, about $50 billion is being spent on this every year. So I launched a landing page on Reddit. I got 1,000 signups overnight. And I was like, whoa, this is really, there's something here. And so then I started building product to help do this niche. And it's like all of a sudden you've got market information,
Is
external
that a true
validation.
story? I like that.
No, I just made that up. But
That's pretty good.
Yeah,
I'm like, oh, sounds like a good investment opportunity.
that's what I'm talking about. That's why people pay me money. Like I like it's like, how do you relay a narrative? Like that's a very simple narrative, right? Like you start that invest, and there's a bunch of patterns in there that investors like to hear. Companies that go out and just start building a product without getting external validation, like invest money in engineers, immediately investors are like, you suck. But if you put up a landing page, get validation, then start building a product, that's a pattern they love. So you can incorporate these patterns that investors like to see in your own pitch, knowing that like Airbnb didn't start it as one thing and ended up as something else. That's another pattern. Or Slack did that. Very common pattern. So whenever I'm telling stories with myself or my companies, and I have a couple of blog posts I've done this and videos I've done on this, it's like, tell a story that matches the patterns of other successful people, and you'll signal that you're like them. And then if you're wacky like Adam Newman and you have a story that's similar to his, people are like, this is the next Adam Newman. And it's like, it's not really, but like, it's good storytelling and narrative, because so much of making decisions is just emotion. And even better if you can be like a little flamboyant and like superfluous, like I'm being right now. That's memorable and it's emotive, and you're convincing people to feel the emotion that you want them to feel at the moment you want them to feel it. And that's the kind of magic of good storytelling.
What do you think,
I
Colin?
like it. Well, I mean, it's kind of like I always think about. I think I've raised, I don't know, a lot of money in my career.
Well, let's
And
do a quick measuring competition. Who's
oh no,
got
I
more,
just
you or
like
Jack? Is that what you're trying to say?
I think I got more and on the primary side, like into a company. But I think the thing I always try to think about is like, what are the words they used and putting it back in their words, right? Just like speaking to them in their language. I know that it's probably a very similar thing. I also know that like Jack says, there's pattern recognition to everything.
Yeah.
People are trying to simplify and make decisions quicker. And so to the extent that you can just present things to them in the way that they want to digest it, the faster you can get to a decision, whether it's yes or no, but you probably tilt the odds in your favor into getting a yes. Right. And I think what's interesting, one thing I've experienced is like early stage, it's very much story based. And as you get further along, like past seed into like series A, B, and C, it's very much a metrics driven, like how do you present this business in a way that makes sense? And I think that's like, I always see that people falter. Like they got really good at like raising with the story, and then they're like going into
You kind
A,
of
B,
need
and C.
both. I think the best founders kind of need both. You're right. At the start,
Yeah.
it's a growth narrative. It's story based. I mean, you're pitching a stupid idea. It's like a startup, right? Like obviously, no one has done this. It's a horrible. Like every all the best startups sound stupid at the start, right? Like, oh, let me have someone sleep on my couch. Let me, pick up a stranger, right? It sounds stupid at the start. And then, so you have to pitch that story, right? And that growth narrative. And then, I think the best ones sort of use that, plus the metrics at seed, series A, et cetera. So, okay. So that's number one. I like that. I haven't really thought about that much, Jack. What's number two? The number two thing you help your clients with?
Number two is just booking meetings, right? Because the reality is, I always like to say fundraising comes down to two things. It's part art and part science. Art, storytelling, science is how the hell are you going to get 100 meetings, right? So like, well, let's work backwards. So that's why I said beginning, like, what are the indicators that founders are going to be successful? What's their network look like is the first indicator. So as if you have 30 people in your network immediately who've all raised money from A16Z, you're going to know a lot of people that can make introductions to investors. You could potentially, if all those people make one introduction, that's 30 meetings right there. If they make two, that's 60. And if you get three out of them, you've got your full 100. So my next thing that I'll work with is very like empirically, like, what does your network look like? And then we have, assuming we need 100 plus meetings, like 100 is like kind of the minimum. Like most people I know that do like 150, 200 to raise around. For me, it was closer to 150, 200. And so for me, I work backwards, like, how are we going to get those meetings? And so it's going to come of one of two ways, right? Like if you don't have those people, you're going to have to meet those people. So like, where are we going to find more founders that you can buy in quickly or relatively quickly in the next 2-3 months? We can start to build up a network and get people, like, establish credibility among more people that can make referrals to us. Like, one thing that I'll think, then like, okay, another thing is if you go viral or you have a moment online, you can get a lot of meetings out of that. So if founders have a good brand reputation, social presence, they can use that as leverage to get meetings and get investors to reach out to them. Or the old-fashioned way is cold outreach, which I've done a lot of. And most founders are like, you obviously don't want to do cold outreach primarily. You want to have warm intros always be your primary. But like, if you don't have a good network, you have to do cold outreach to some extent, even if it's cold to warm, as I like to call it, where you're reaching out to people cold to establish credibility, to ultimately get them to make warm intros for you. Now, there's some clever ways you can go about doing that to try and speed that process up, but it's always going to be a relatively long process. But I've done a ton of cold outreach in my life, and I did a lot of cold outreach for past fundraisers and raised a lot of money from cold messaging people. So it's just something that, like, if you don't have a network.
What's a good cold outreach look like?
Great question. First sentence, I always lead with myself, because you humanize yourself and like establish credibility that you're legit. So I lead with myself being like, hey, I'm Jack. I've built a Minecraft server with 1 million players, raised $53 million, and now I'm doing X. X does Y. One sentence, we have this amount of traction. That's my first sentence credibility. Second sentence, what you do, and traction, numbers, always. And throughout the whole message, I try and use numbers about bragging about what I did. If I sold stuff, I'd be like, I sold $20 million of trucks last year. If I was building my last startup was a social commerce thing. So I'd be like, hey, we sell products for brands through through video calls. Smashbox is paying us $3,000 a month. And then the third sentence for me is like an insight. So like, what you know about the market that other people don't. So it might be that like, Western consumers don't like being sold to, which is why Pop Shot and whatnot are going to fail. So I pick two companies that are analogs in this space and be like, they're getting X wrong, Y is right. And then the last sentence is a call to action. So, hey, raising our first round, do you want to chat? And so very short, like, I'm just trying to hook interest and like cut through all the fluff of like buzzwords and nonsense that are out there, and just be like, this is all you need to make a decision of whether or not you want to look at my deck or agree to meet with me.
Yeah. I think the only thing that I feel like is missing from that, and I'm curious how important you think this is like establishing a relationship before you pitch them. And it doesn't have to be like, I met them and had a 30-minute coffee, but like, for example, if someone like VCs are very active on Twitter, follow them on Twitter before you reach out to them. They may see your name pop up in the follow you tab. You interact with a few of their tweets, like, a few thoughtful comments on the replies. If they wrote, especially if you kind of lean into the ego, like if they have a podcast or a newsletter, or if they publish something recently, you can kind of like, hey, share it and tag them. You know what I mean? Like something that's sort of like literally 2 minutes or less of work. And obviously, maybe you can't do that for all 100 or 1,000 people that you reach out to, but in your tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, maybe the tier 1 people, you put a little more effort to, like I would probably not cold outreach to any VC without like following them on Twitter and liking a couple of their tweets, replying to them. And to be frank, like I'm lazy, so I'd probably have one of my virtual assistants do it and maybe not reply, but at least like 3 of their tweets and follow them. So there's something there. And there's like, maybe, hey, out of 1,000 people, maybe 10% will see my name. Now, when I cold outreach to 10%, they'll have at least seen my name, like Harry Campbell. Oh, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, I totally get it. I mostly agree. I think when you have people that you really want to talk to, you should be direct and like put some more effort in. But for me, cold outreach is almost always a numbers game.
Hmm.
And it becomes almost an impossible task at scale because like the response rate's going to be best
Yeah.
case 5 to 10%. So if you send 100 messages, your response rate's going to be 5%, which means your
Yeah.
book rate might be 1 out of 100. If you're really cracked and good, you might get 10 out of 100. That would be like really, really good. That being said, like like I'm kind of a maniac. Last for fundraising, I DM Connie Chan, this
Hmm.
GP at 16Z, and got her to book a meeting with me. Like I've DM'd people at Sequoia, and we DM'd Dan Rose from Kotu and met
Yeah.
with the entire partnership at one point. Like it can happen, but you need a really good message, and it also needs to be super timely. Is the other thing about that. So I think if we knew at our moment in time that what we were pitching was really hot on the market,
Hmm.
social commerce when we went out for that raise was like one of the hottest things in VC. Pop Shop had just got a ton of money. We like were kind of clubhousey, so we kind of had like connection of like where pop up video or audio was really hot. And so it was just like really popular. And so I think that's why our DMs, we were able to go without falling and building a relationship, reach out to these people because there are a bunch of deals being made in this space right now and it's hyper competitive. So I think the nuance here is if you are not in a really hypey space, you relationship building, like Harry said, is will go 100% the way to go. And finding a way to scale that to make it a little easier, like using a VA or something, is really smart. And I think I would totally recommend doing that.
Yeah, very cool. Well, and I know you did a interview recently. I'll leave a link in the show notes. It looks like it was on Founder Suite fundraising for startups that I listened to, and you kind of shared even more details. I won't ask you all of the
Sure.
same questions, but we'll leave a link in the show notes if people want to even get some more insight from you on the fundraising process. I think you talked about a bit more there. Anything else you want to ask, Colin, before we wrap it up?
No, this is fun.
All right, learned some good tips, got some good tricks. I think I'm subscribed to the newsletter. Looks like I've got one in my inbox right now from Jabroni
Got a live
Capital
one.
called Boomer Rage. I've got a live one. It's unread, so
Uh,
I'll have to check that out later after my lunch break. Really appreciate you coming on, Jack. If folks want to follow you on LinkedIn or learn more about what you're up to, where can they go? Where can they find you?
yeah, just Jack Kuveke, Kuveke, pretty much on all social media. And the last thing, if you want to read the newsletter, jabronicapital.com.
Sweet. Yeah, we'll definitely leave a link to that. And you did mention a couple sort of examples or resources or templates. I don't know if you have any handy, but if you do, it might be cool. We could sort of share a link in the
Sure.
blog post on wannabeangels.com. Was there one or two that you think might be, maybe like an example of, like the
Yeah.
the CC, that you sent? What was that one? That was the founder kind of
Mhm.
email with help for fundraising. Is that what we
Yeah.
talked about?
Yeah, I'll share a couple of
Yeah,
these
maybe if you
resources.
have like a cool screenshot or something we can copy and paste, we'll go ahead and put that in the blog post. I want to be angels, remove any personal info, but just so people can kind of, we talked about it a lot, but if people actually want to see like a real life example, I think that would be
Mhm.
cool to put in the blog post. And yeah, and then they can find that on wannabeangels.com. Awesome, Jack. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you guys.